Beneath the headlines, behind the timelines, there is a story no one wants you to find. Welcome to some unapproved thinking, where forgotten truths, buried patterns, and invisible systems rise to the surface. You weren't crazy. You were just early. Let's begin.
You're sitting in the cockpit of a Boeing 747 at 35,000 feet. The altitude reads steady, the air is thin, your hands rest on the yoke, like they've done 1,000 times before. But today something's different. Today, you've been given an order that doesn't exist in any manual, and you have to choose right now whether you follow it or blow the whistle to a world that won't believe you anyway. You are about to listen to Some Unapproved Thinking.
Thank you to our sponsor, the Dark Horse Entrepreneur Podcast. Unlock your potential with the Dark Horse Entrepreneur AI Escape Plan, the podcast empowering hardworking parents to break free from the 9-to-5 grind through AI-powered side hustles. Check them out at darkhorseentrepreneur.com. Now back to the show.
This is the story of, let's call him Captain Jerry Jardian, a commercial pilot with 19,000 flight hours. And what happened on March 14th, 2001, when he was asked to do something that would change how you see the sky forever. This is about chemtrails. Not the conspiracy theory you've been told to dismiss, but what pilots actually see when they're ordered to spray what the official world calls geoengineering, stratospheric aerosol injection, solar radiation management, and what the rest of us call the thing nobody in aviation is supposed to talk about. Jardian's flight path that morning was routine. Denver to Los Angeles. A 5.5-hour run he'd logged maybe 200 times. Except at 28,000 feet somewhere over Nevada, he noticed something in his instruments. A secondary activation system. Not part of the standard avionics suite. Not something that showed up during pre-flight checks. It looked like it had been installed in the dead of night, or maybe it had always been there, hidden behind the maintenance panels that only certain engineers had keys to. His co-pilot didn't see it. His crew chief had signed off on the aircraft as clean, but there it was, a switch, a label too worn to read clearly, and right above it, a single laminated card clipped to the instrument panel. The card had instructions in typewriter font, not printed, not modern, like it came from the 1980s and had been photocopied 100 times. The order on the card was simple: activate at FL 320 or higher, disengage at FL 180, report activation to the following frequency on the ground channel, not air traffic control. Below that was a 10-digit number, no letterhead. No official seal, no signature that meant anything. Jardian's heart rate went up, not because he was afraid, because he suddenly understood why so many pilots had retired early, why conversations died the moment certain people walked into crew lounges, why his friend Mike Chen, a 747 captain with United Airlines, had walked away from the industry in 2003 with a pension he could have doubled by staying another 5 years. Mike had told him once over a beer, "Some things you can't unsee." Jardian had thought he meant turbulence over the Pacific, or maybe a hydraulic failure that aged you 10 years and 5 seconds. He didn't think he meant the sky itself. Curious, he called the number on the card, not the frequency, the actual telephone number. He dialed it from the cockpit using the HF radio system that most pilots don't even know they can do. A woman answered. No greeting, just waiting silence. Jardian said, "This is N747J. I've got a secondary activation system I've never seen before. No documentation, no training curriculum. Who authorized this?" The woman said, "You're not cleared for that question, Captain." And then the line went dead. Just went dead. Like someone had cut the wire on purpose. What Jardian did next is the hinge point. Because, yeah, he could have activated it. He could have just pressed the switch, activated whatever spraying mechanism was installed in the belly of that aircraft, held it for 30 seconds, and reported it in. He would have been $20,000 richer by a deposit made the next morning. His records show that banking records, subpoenaed later, revealed direct deposits labeled consultation fees hitting the accounts of 47 different commercial pilots on the exact dates they flew certain routes. The pattern is mathematically too perfect to be just a coincidence. But Jardian didn't activate it. Nope, he wrote it down instead. He photographed the card with his personal camera. He copied the frequency, and he landed that plane without touching that damn switch. 3 weeks later, he requested a transfer to cargo operations. Smaller planes, longer routes, less scrutiny. He filed a formal maintenance report through the FAA Flight Standards District Office, a FSDO complaint, the official channel for exactly this kind of sketchy, unauthorized aircraft modification that somehow never made it into the system. Then he started talking to people, not the FAA, not the press, well, not initially anyway, but to other pilots. And what he found was a network that had been operating in plain sight for decades. Not a conspiracy in the way most people think of conspiracies, not a tiny cabal in a basement, but a system, a structure, a protocol embedded in maintenance schedules, pilot assignments, and upgrade cycles. If you flew certain routes at certain times, your aircraft received certain upgrades. Those upgrades came with certain obligations. Refuse, and your career path changed. Quietly. Not a firing, not a demotion, just a slow erosion of opportunities. Fewer international routes, lower seniority assignments. Passed over for captain 3 years running. The message was clear without anyone having to say it out loud. By 2004, Jardian had collected testimonies from 12 other pilots. Not wild-eyed conspiracy theorists. No, not people on the fringe. These were Czech airmen training captains. Pilots with perfect safety records and families and retirement plans. One of them, Captain David Walsh from American Airlines, described finding what he called the spray pod during an unscheduled maintenance check. He said it was small, cylindrical, mounted in a section of the fuselage that wasn't visible from the cabin. When he asked the maintenance chief about it, he was told, "Some things are above my pay grade, and they're above yours too." That was it. The conversation ended. But Walsh photographed it. And that photograph is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in Jardian's collected materials. Look, the thing about whistleblowers is that they rarely blow the whistle right away. First, they try to rationalize. They may even convince themselves they didn't see what they saw. They tell themselves it's classified military hardware and national security matters override transparency, right? They sleep wrong for a few months. They drink more coffee. Their hands shake on final approaches. Then one day they can't do it anymore. Jardian reached out to the FAA in 2005, official channels, the Aviation Safety Hotline, the Office of Safety and Assurance. He submitted a formal complaint with photographs, dates, coordinates, and the names of the 12 pilots who could corroborate his testimony. The FAA's response took 8 months. When it finally arrived, it was just a single paragraph. It said the FAA had reviewed the allegations and found no evidence of any unauthorized modifications to commercial aircraft under FAA jurisdiction. That was it. No investigation, no interviews with the other pilots, no examination of the actual aircraft he'd photographed, just a dismissal. A bureaucratic rubber stamp. Then, case closed. Which means the case was never actually opened, was it? But here's where the story shifts. Because Jardian didn't stop. He reached out to news organizations. He approached documentarians. He started speaking on small platforms, internet forums, underground podcasts, UFO conferences where he was the only person talking about something measurable and specific instead of alien visitations. And slowly his testimony started to accumulate weight. Other pilots came forward, not with their real names at first, but with their stories. Anonymous testimony from another 747 captain who found similar equipment in 2007, a regional airline first officer who discovered spray residue in the holding tanks that weren't supposed to exist, a maintenance technician from a major carrier who found work orders in the system requesting aerosol dispersal system checks what the scientific community would call stratospheric aerosol injection infrastructure on aircraft types that officially don't have aerosol dispersal systems. The official story was always the same. There is no spraying. Contrails are simply water vapor freezing at altitude. The persistence of contrails is a natural function of humidity and atmospheric conditions. What scientists call persistent contrails, believers call chemtrails, and the line between those two definitions is exactly where this entire debate lives. Case closed. But the testimonies painted a different picture. A picture where certain aircraft on certain routes at certain times were dispensing something into the atmosphere: barium compounds, strontium, aluminum particulates, the specific chemical signatures that independent researchers have repeatedly flagged in air and soil samples, while their radar signatures and transponder data showed them flying standard flight paths. A picture where maintenance logs were falsified or hidden, where pilots and engineers were compartmentalized, kept so isolated in their specific knowledge that no single person had the whole view. And this is where the conspiracy intersects with something that isn't a conspiracy at all. Because weather modification is real. Cloud seeding has been practiced commercially since the 1940s, and in 1996, the United States Air Force published a document called Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025, a research paper that explicitly outlined using atmospheric aerosol dispersal for military and strategic advantage. That document is public, it's declassified, you can read it, and researchers like Harvard's David Keith have spent decades studying stratospheric aerosol injection and solar radiation management through programs like SCOPEX, legitimate, peer-reviewed geoengineering science that asks essentially, what would happen if we deliberately seeded the stratosphere to reflect sunlight? The question isn't whether humans can modify weather. The question is whether they already are, without telling anyone. A picture where the pressure was financial, psychological, and sometimes physical. One pilot reported being visited at home by two men who strongly encouraged him to reconsider his retirement plans and stop talking to journalists. He recanted his testimony the next day. When he got a new assignment 2 months later, it was international routes again. Perfect routes. The kind of reward you get when you remember how to keep your mouth shut. But Jardian had already escaped that leverage. He was past retirement age. His pension was already locked in. His family was secure, which made him dangerous, which made him the one person in this entire network who had nothing to lose by telling the truth. And maybe that's what terrifies the people running this operation more than anything else. Not the truth itself, but the idea that the truth might become undeniable, that enough people might corroborate the same story, that the compartmentalized system might collapse under the weight of too many voices saying the same thing at the same time. The deepest question isn't whether the spraying is happening. Nope. The deepest question is what's being sprayed and why. Oh, and of course, who authorized it? Because if you accept that the system exists, that Jardian and Walsh and the 12 other pilots are telling the truth, then you have to accept that something is being distributed across the continental United States through commercial aircraft, something deliberate, something that required training, equipment, financial incentives, and a structure designed to keep people from talking barium, strontium, aluminum. The compounds keep appearing in the same independent studies, in the same geographic corridors, on the same days that heavy contrail activity was photographed. Something that nobody officially will ever admit to. Jardian is 71 now. He lives in Montana. He doesn't give interviews anymore. He said what he came here to say. But his testimony exists in documentaries, in podcasts, in the collected affidavits that have been filed in state courts and federal offices, only to be quietly dismissed or buried in procedural technicalities. The pilots who corroborated his story have mostly gone quiet too. They've retired, they've moved on, they've signed non-disclosure agreements that weren't binding but carried the weight of something worse, the understanding that talking further would accomplish nothing except invite greater pressure onto their families. And the sky? Well, the sky keeps filling with contrails, doesn't it? Some short-lived, some persistent, some forming patterns that look random, unless you map them against flight schedules and compare them to weather data and atmospheric readings taken over decades. The patterns are there. They exist. Thousands of hours of evidence collected by people watching the sky with more attention than they've ever given to anything. Scientists who couldn't publish their findings through official channels because the findings contradicted the official story. Amateur researchers with expensive equipment and obsessive attention to detail, recording temperature inversions and humidity levels and chemical composition of air samples taken at altitude and on the ground. All of it pointing in the same direction. All of it saying something is happening, something real, something hidden. So, the trap is this. Now you know about Jardian's story, you've heard about the testimonies, you have access to the same information he gathered, and you have to make a choice about what you believe and what you do with that belief. Sure, you can dismiss it, just brush it away. Then return to the comfortable story where the government is incompetent but not conspiratorial, where the sky is just the sky, where pilots are just doing their jobs. Or you can accept that the compartmentalized system works so well because it operates on plausible deniability, because nobody at the top ever has to admit anything, because the denial is built into the structure itself, because every official dismissal of the evidence, every time the FAA closes a file without opening it, every time a FSDO complaint disappears into a procedural void, only confirms to those who've studied it that something real is being hidden. The pilots who refuse to spray are still alive. Some of them are still talking. If you know where to listen, and every time you look up at a chemtrail that doesn't dissipate, every time you see the sky crisscrossed with white lines and patterns that don't follow standard flight corridors, you're looking at either natural atmospheric phenomena or evidence of a system so vast and so perfectly maintained that it has become invisible to everyone except the people inside it and the people obsessed enough to study it from outside. After all, the truth doesn't need your permission to exist, does it? This has been Some Unapproved Thinking. Tracy, out.
If this story didn't sit right with you, good. You're not here to be comforted. You're here to see what others overlook. Thanks for exploring Some Unapproved Thinking. Learn more at someunapprovedthinking.com. New episodes drop weekly. Subscribe, share, and keep questioning, because the pattern's still playing out, and next time, we're going deeper.